Welcome back, dear listeners. Today, we're stepping into a story that begins with a simple climb, but unravels into something far greater. A mystery buried beneath the snow, hidden for decades, waiting to be discovered. It's a tale of curiosity, adventure, and the kind of secrets that linger in the shadows of forgotten places. So settle in, because this journey will take us to the edge of what's possible, and perhaps beyond. Let's begin. Philip struggled to get up on the mountain. When reaching the top, he stares right at an abandoned plane. He realizes that this had to be here for decades. How could something so big go unnoticed for so long? He had to know what this plane was hiding inside. This was too big for Philip to research on his own, so he signaled two of his colleagues with a flare gun. They flew over by helicopter immediately, but no one was prepared for what they were about to see. Philip was the first person who stepped inside the plane. His mouth fell open instantly. How is it possible that no one knew about this? Philip and his colleagues look at each other in disbelief. This will make them famous. But what do they find inside the plane that is so important? But this reminded Philip of when he received an anonymous cryptic letter at home a couple of days ago. Without notice, he was called to the research station before discovering the plane. Was this connected somehow? He had left behind all his friends and family for this mysterious project and traveled to an unknown country. He was determined to turn over every stone for this project. He wondered why this person had chosen him in particular and how he or she got his address. But Philip could have never expected his trip to end like this. He arrived at the town a few days after he had received the letter. It was a very old and empty town. Philip started his research by knocking on doors and asking people about the legend. But the people did not receive him with open arms. He had knocked on almost every door when he saw an old man walking the streets. Philip ran toward the man and asked if he could tell him something about the urban legend. The man hesitated, but then said to Philip, "Come to the old horse in an hour." Philip agreed without knowing what the old horse was. It turned out that the old horse was a little cafe in the center of the town. When Philip entered the cafe, he saw the man had already arrived. Philip sat across from the man and put his notebook on the table. The man stayed silent for a while, but then he started talking. The legend goes as follows. There once was a plane with the number 66 that was supposed to fly to Japan. No one knew what was on the plane or what it was carrying, and as soon as the plane took off, it went off the radar. Some say there was a horrible storm, but scientists debunked that theory. To this day, no one knows what happened to that plane. Philip looks at the man in disbelief. The man in turn looked at him stoically. He wanted to ask more questions, but the man got up and walked out of the cafe. There was only one thing left to do, and Philip wasn't entirely happy about it. He went on his own search, but first he had to figure out what route the plane could have flown and followed that route. But how does he figure this out? Then suddenly he gets an idea. The local airport employees needed to know something about the plane's disappearance, so he started at the Alaskan airport. When Philip came home from the airport, he saw a little note attached to his door. Philip opened the note and immediately recognized the handwriting. It was from the same person as the anonymous letter was from, but this time there was only one sentence. Philip reread the sentence 3 times so that he could fully absorb it. Go to the right side of town and walk along the mountain path. Find Theo. Philip wondered who this person was who kept sending him notes and letters, and who was this Theo. But he knew what he had to do now. Philip packed his backpack and started his journey through the deserted town. The village looks like a ghost town. No light shines in the houses and no one else is on the streets. When he reached the mountain path, he noticed something strange. There was a sign that said, "Restricted area, no trespassing," but this didn't scare Philip, and he started walking. He saw a little cottage in the distance. That must be Theo, he thought, and he started to walk a little faster. A storm was heading toward him, so he had to reach the cottage just in time, but then something happens that he didn't expect. To his surprise, no one was home. He banged on the door as the wind started to pick up, then the door flipped open, and Philip stood face to face with the silhouette of a little man. "Theo?" he asked, and the man stepped aside. He didn't say a word to Philip, which was strange. It felt like he was expecting him. The man pointed to a bed, but there was something else on top of the bed, another note. The note contained coordinates. Philip is fortunately good at reading coordinates, so he knows roughly which way to go. Philip knew the plane had to be where the coordinates led him, so the following day he continued his search optimistically. Philip walked and walked until his legs started to get sore. He was almost at the top of the mountain, and there was still no sign of the plane anywhere. But then he sees something he can't explain. Philip looks to his left and sees something sticking out of another mountain. It doesn't look like something out of nature. That must be the plane, Philip thinks. But the plane is at least another day's walk from where he's standing. He shuffles his feet over the ground to feel the rocks and makes his way over to the plane. When Philip finally reached the plane, he couldn't believe his eyes. It was almost entirely buried under the snow, except for the one wing he saw. This was way too big for Philip to do on his own, so he mapped where the plane was and journeyed back to Theo's cabin. There he would call for backup. Philip called two of his best friends who were also researchers, Lincoln and Greg. They had no idea that Philip was all the way in Alaska, but didn't doubt him when he asked them to come too. They knew there had to be something extraordinary for Philip to fly over there. Philip led the way toward the plane, and his friends followed him blindly. They spent the first few days digging the plane out of the snow. Somehow the plane was still mainly intact after the crash. The only things that were broken off were one side wing and the back tail of the plane, but there were no holes in the side. They had to figure out another way to get inside the plane. Lincoln suggested that they drill a hole in one of the plane's doors. That way they could get inside. But Philip was more interested in something else he saw sticking out of the tail of the plane. It was a little orange device, and he soon realized what he had found. He had found the black box of the plane. This was something very serious because this box held the reason why the plane crashed so many years ago. Philip took the box back to the cabin and screwed it open, only to find something very strange inside. There should be a big memory card of some sort inside the box, but there was nothing. Did someone take it out, or was it never even there in the first place? Philip suddenly remembers the anonymous letters he had received. What if this person had taken out the memory card, and they only needed Philip to open up the plane so they could swoop in and steal everything that hid inside? He shakes his head and tells himself to get it together, but the thought stays in the back of his mind. Philip had never told Lincoln and Greg about the anonymous letters, and he didn't intend to do so until one of them asked about it. They wondered how Philip knew about this plane and why no one from the authority was helping him. But when he explained what had happened, Lincoln and Greg reacted differently than he expected. They got scared when they discovered what was happening and suddenly didn't want to continue their work. So Philip reminded them about the thrill and adventure they were having. What was the worst thing that could happen? Philip convinced them to continue the research. So they started drilling the next day. It was a bigger job than they anticipated, but they got through the plane's exterior after a while, and he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The plane was filled with crates, but that wasn't the only thing he saw. Something in the corner of the plane glistened in the sunlight. It looked like a bullet, but it was all flattened by something. Philip showed them the bullet, and they decided to check the cockpit together. The cockpit was empty. There were no bodies or other signs that there had been two people in there flying the plane. While Philip stayed in the cockpit to look around, Greg ran back to the cottage and grabbed a crowbar to open the crates. But when he opened the crates, he couldn't believe his eyes. He called for Philip and he rushed to Greg, but Lincoln was nowhere to be found. Suddenly they heard a helicopter flying over their heads. Not long after that, Lincoln ran inside and yelled that the police were coming, and it didn't look good. Philip tried to think of an explanation. The police arrived within a few minutes, and they surrounded the plane. Philip, Lincoln, and Greg walked out of the plane with their hands up in the air. They were taken to the police station and questioned one by one. Philip was the last one, and he could finally show the police officers the letters. They were confused as to why he had never called the police, but he explained that he was a researcher and wanted to discover it independently. Philip, Lincoln, and Greg helped the police with the case, and got an honorary medal for finding the plane. But it wasn't finished yet. There was one more person that needed to be found. The anonymous tipper. The police promised Philip to find this person, but it turned out to be harder than they thought. Philip and his friends flew home, and they wrote a book about their adventure. The book became a bestseller, and everyone wondered about this anonymous tipper. But it turned out that this person was never found, and no one will ever know why they did what they did.